All right, welcome again to EMVCo's roundtable webinar with FIDO Alliance and W3C. And we're going to explore how EMV 3D Secure and Secure Payment Confirmation work together. I'm Brian Byrne, Director of Engagement and Operations for EMVCo. And so for a quick introduction, if we could start off with Bastian, please. Bastian, who's talking to us on mute.
Yeah, it has to happen. So I'm Bastian Adjé. I'm an EMVCo technology consultant supporting EMVCo on various technologies and as well some relationship with other specification bodies. Hello, everyone.
Thanks, Bastian. Ian?
Hi, my name is Ian Jacobs. I lead W3C's payment standardization activities. I've been at the World Wide Web Consortium for over 25 years.
And last and absolutely not least, Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina Halker. I'm the Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer of FIDO Alliance, responsible for oversight of the program management and the membership program.
Thank you, Christina. So I'm just going to give a quick update for those who may not be familiar with EMVCo. So EMVCo's mission, we're here to facilitate card-based payments that work seamlessly and securely around the world. And we deliver on this mission by developing specifications and the supporting approval and evaluation, testing, and marks programs for these products to enable the delivery of consistent and convenient payments for merchants, businesses, and consumers all around the world. And key to EMVCo's work is close collaboration with the payments industry to adapt and evolve these specifications so that they continue to support technology innovations. And today's roundtable is a good example of that. And they support the needs of different marketplaces and changes in consumer behavior. So over to Christina.
All right, so the FIDO Alliance really has a very specific mission of solving the password problem. We're an open industry association with over 250 members from Apple and Google and Microsoft and Amazon, all the way down to small startups. We're really focusing on reducing the world's over-reliance on passwords. We develop specifications and certification programs to ensure interoperability and security, and continue to look at other areas of opportunity within the authentication and identity space to address needs to make sure that solutions are secure and interoperable. While we are not solely focused on the payments industry, we do have other engagement in healthcare and government and other industries. We have a very clear focus in the payments industry, largely due to a significant number of our members being from the payments industry. So we care deeply about making sure that what we're doing is aligned with the other organizations we work with from the industry engagement perspective, and also from a regulatory and government engagement perspective. I guess next.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. Over to Ian.
Thanks, Brian. First of all, thank you for inviting me today to speak. For those unfamiliar with the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C, we were launched in 1994 by Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the web, to develop standards and guidelines to make the web a platform for humanity. That includes technology development to build the web so that it meets the needs of civil society, including in areas like accessibility to users with disability, internationalization, and of course, privacy and security. We'll hear about that today. So W3C creates open web standards to meet the needs of industry, and as Christina said, we collaborate with many other bodies to help make sure that open web technologies can be used to meet real world business requirements. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So that was our quick introduction, and we can turn off the slide deck now, please. Thank you very much. So I'd like to stick with Ian, actually. Could you get us going by giving us an introduction to the Web Payment Security Interest Group?
Sure. So Bastien and Christina and I are co-chairs of the Web Payment Security Interest Group at W3C, or WPSIG, as we call it. The three organizations had been developing technologies to improve online payment security for many years. And as the web evolved and as technologies changed, we realized that it was necessary to collaborate and cooperate more closely to help ensure that these technologies we were developing would work well together in service of more secure web payments and payments overall. So instead of having bilateral conversations ad hoc, we decided to create a group in April 2019, a sort of standing conversation of the three organizations. And we learn about each other's work, and we try to find solutions that will work and connect our different technologies. And so I hope that we hear in today's presentation, and that you'll hear a lot more about the work over the last year and a half or so that has been very exciting. So, so we are a collaborative body to help improve web payment security.
And Bastien, and then Christina, anything else you wanted to add about the?
Yeah, if I may, actually, from an EMVCo perspective, there was a lot of value in participating with this group, because it enables the engagement with companies that so involved in FIDO Alliance and W3C to interact with us and to share information, to share ideas and use cases. I mean, to bring this variety of thoughts within the group, and as well to interact within the other W3C working groups. So these companies that we are not, as EMVCo, traditionally in contact with, either through the EMVCo Associate Program or through the other technical liaison that EMVCo has, and the other partnerships. So definitely this group has been, and these companies are valuable in enabling the evolution of the EMVCo specifications, and it also helps us to provide further education outside of the core payment people that we used to deal with. So again, highly valuable for us, and being able to share as well what we are doing with other new people, I would say.
Thanks, Bastien. Christina, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would agree with Bastien. Certainly from a FIDO membership perspective, this adds value and provides a focus for those payments-related companies who've been actively engaged. It helps us to really have more visibility into what the other two organizations are working on, and helps us align what we're doing within FIDO Alliance to make sure that we have an aligned and coordinated approach to new technology. And we can share that information within our organization at large to make sure that everybody understands how the broader ecosystem works. So it provides a much broader perspective from the payments perspective in terms of what FIDO's looking to do and what FIDO is doing today.
Thanks, Christina. So I'd like to stick with you for the next question. There's certainly a lot of noise in the industry about multi-factor authentication as a rising trend. Could you give us an overview of multi-factor authentication and why it's important?
Sure. So I think starting at the very basics, I don't think anybody on this call would be surprised to hear that passwords are a problem. You know, we've had them for many, many years. Over the last years, and certainly since the pandemic started, we've seen a huge increase in phishing attacks, man-in-the-middle attacks, various other types of attacks, data breaches, etc. And so there's been an increased focus on trying to secure authentication to access services or to perform a transaction, which is where multi-factor authentication comes in. It really provides an additional level of security and authentication to make sure that there's no bad actors accessing your account. what we're trying to do within FIDO Alliance is really take that a step further using public key cryptography to authenticate to a service or product. And when you actually do that authentication, there's no shared secret. So there's nothing on a cloud-based server that can be hacked and stolen. All of the shared secrets remain on the device. And this is really kind of the pillar stone of multi-factor authentication. Is it's something that you have, so it might be a biometric or a USB key that you use to do that authentication. You know, we've also talked about one-time passcodes in the past, which is certainly a step forward away from just passwords alone, but they're still vulnerable. So really we're looking at taking authentication a step further and securing it while making sure that it stays usable and easy for a user to actually do and learn and use going forward. The other side of it is that we've seen increased focus on this from regulators around the world. You know, we work a lot with NIST in the US, and we've worked a lot with the European regulators specifically. And they're asking a lot of questions about how to make sure that when you do authentication, in particular for those high-risk services, you know, how can we make this more secure? And so that's where we're really focused, certainly in the FIDO Alliance, to make sure that we have a secure and user-friendly experience when you're logging into a service or making a transaction effectively.
Thanks, Christina. Ian or Bastian, do you have anything you wanted to add to that question? This is a future that I'm very much looking forward to. I got a notification last week from Equifax, the monitoring agency, telling me that my personal email address and a password had been found on the dark web. But they didn't actually tell me which particular account it was associated with. So I'm sitting there thinking, great, do I change 200 passwords? Or do I live with this risk? And I'm thinking, you know, I would love to get away from all of this password nonsense in the future. So next question, I'd like Bastian to kick off this one. How can EMV3DS use FIDO authentication?
Yeah. So as you know, FIDO is used to authenticate the cardholder and the card issuer. So as a basis, that's the basic objective of FIDO. But this authentication can happen at multiple steps for the cardholder. So for example, in many e-commerce purchases, the user journey begins with a merchant-initiated authentication, so which means that it could be for the user to log in, potentially a user authentication login password at the merchant side, or this authentication could happen as well just after initiating the checkout for the e-commerce transactions. These are two examples. It could happen at another time, but there's one authentication with the merchant. And when the merchant uses strong customer authentication, or strong authentication methods such as FIDO authentication, the data and the details regarding the authentication could be valuable to the issuer which performed the authentication at the end for the payment for the cardholder using the EMV3DS flow. So in the case of a consumer authentication using FIDO authentication at the merchant side, with the 3DS flow, the FIDO data can be used to attest that the merchant initiated a strong customer authentication that has taken place before the EMV transaction. So use FIDO to authenticate to the merchant, and then or to anything else, and then the information is transmitted during the 3DS transaction, which can definitely improve the approval rate and as well reduce the friction for the consumer and enhance the user experience. I mean, this authentication, which is quite important, we always try to reduce the interference with the user or to reduce the friction with the user and the consumer, and definitely this process will help to do so. So using the FIDO authentication data and the 3DS flow, the merchant will be able to deliver all the data elements required and present it to the card issuer for the issuer to perform with this consistent set of value and the information of the device and all the information for specific transactions. We'll be able to use it to perform the authentication and then potentially avoid the repetition of the consumer authentication, and then increase the probability of frictionless flow, frictionless experience for the consumer, and highly limits the card abandonments, which is one of the reasons. This friction is one of the reasons for card abandonment. So definitely using all this technology together will help to facilitate the purchases, to conclude the transactions, and to perform the authentication.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bastien. So I think we've set the stage. How about we ask Ian to start off explaining to us what is secure payment confirmation? What problem does it attempt to solve?
So thanks, Brian. There is an inherent tension between security and usability. And so the problem statement from the W3C perspective is, what can we do at the browser level to help users who are completing an online checkout authenticate at that moment of payment, but without any friction, or to minimizing the friction and creating a recognized, trusted experience. So the goal of SPC, well, one thing is a big shout out to FIDO. Christina didn't mention the awesome deployment of FIDO, both in terms of devices and in browser support today. So like that's a backdrop for SPC. We looked in the Web Payments Working Group at W3C at how we could leverage FIDO to create a great, strong customer authentication experience during checkout without increasing cart abandonment. So a lot of the motivation came from regulatory requirements in Europe, so the PSD2 requirements for SCA, as well as sort of cryptographic evidence that a user consented to make a payment. So we took those two problem statements. How can we tailor FIDO authentication for common payment scenarios, and how can we fulfill these requirements for consent evidence at the same time? So we began to experiment, and in March of 2021, Stripe had conducted a pilot and reported the results of their pilot. They found that compared to one-time passcodes with SPC, they saw an 8% increase in conversions. And so that generated a lot of excitement. And we've been working since then to refine the technology, make sure it meets industry needs. There are currently 2 more pilots going on today. Again, second one from Stripe and one with Adyen and Airbnb. Again, part of the W3C process is to demonstrate the usefulness of a technology. And so I'll say more about deployment in a moment. So to summarize, then, you have the relationship among these technologies is sometimes challenging to see at a high level. So FIDO is a general purpose authentication mechanism, and SPC builds on that specifically for payments. And 3D Secure is a framework for, as Bastien described, and can use any number of authentication mechanisms, including FIDO and SPC. So Bastien can say more about how it's been integrated into 3D Secure.
Yeah, I think that one point further, I think that SPC is definitely another level to limit the friction for the authentication and somehow to streamline all the technologies that we are all proposing and all the specs that are available there. So the SPC, the secure payment confirmation, can be used by issuer and merchants within the 3DS flow. So all the fields are available there to carry the data that are required for the SPC FIDO based authentication, I should say. and will help to better determine the legitimacy of a transaction. And again, with the objective to reduce the risk of fraud. So with SPC that introduces the FIDO-based challenge method with payment confirmation feeders. I mean, everything is ready on the FIDO side to support it and bind the cardholder authentication with the transaction elements. So it's really a combination, a process of technology that allows the combination of all the information and the available technologies to make the authentication as frictionless as possible in such an environment.
Thanks, Bastien. Christina, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think Bastien and Ryan did a great job.
All right. So I know SPC is very important to us at EMVCo, which is why we made an addition and released EMV 3DS 2.3.1. And this was one of the reasons we wanted to make sure that the EMV 3DS specification accommodated this technology. So Bastien, could you give us an overview of EMV 3DS 2.3.1?
Oh, sure. So this version of the 3DS specification 2.3.1 has been released a month ago and by end of August 2022. So it's available on EMVCo website. And guys, feel free to download it, have a look at it. Definitely this updated specification includes the new data element that I just talked about to optimize the support of SPC and the out-of-band authentication. But not only that, it also includes additional features to enhance the functionality of the server components. It also introduces some announcements on the user interface, the UI, in order, again, to deliver critical information for a best user experience. Make sure that the user has the information required for the authentication, the information on why are they authenticated and which transaction, what are the parameters of the transaction that they are authenticated for. So that's also another very important parameter in the payment space. What do you pay actually? So EMVCo 2.3.1 publication definitely reflects the pace of industry innovation. So we are at the 2.3.1 version. In order to maximize the efficiency of the flows, continue to promote seamless experience. And this is definitely the result of all these interactions, the feedback and the engagement that EMVCo had, either through the EMVCo Associate Program, the subscribers, but also the feedback that we received on the EMVCo query system. And as well, definitely the relationship, the close relationship that we have with the industry, either with the WPC, the Web Payment Security Interest Group, and also with FIDO. So yeah, definitely I would say this is the most advanced version of the spec, and I have no doubt that more innovation will come soon.
Thank you for that. And sticking with you, do you think you could dig a little bit further into how SPC actually is integrated into EMV 3DS?
Yeah, sure. So for SPC, EMV3, so version 2.3.1 uses the FIDO-based authentication to securely confirm that the transaction via the SPC API. So that the API helps to get all the information that will be used in the 3DS flow. So it enables the spec, the 3DS 2.3.1 enables new data to be transmitted. So new data element to be transmitted in an optimized 3DS flow for the support of SPC. So again, it's really the consolidation of all these flows and all these functionalities together. So SPC API will prompt for the FIDO challenge, and then the user interface, which is controlled by the browsers and the operating systems, and the issuer provides the text and the images via the user interface that I just talked about. So the consumer will have all the information required for the transaction to be performed, and the issuer or the SDK, all this information will be consolidated through a single channel and up to the issuer.
Great, thank you very much. So for this next question, which I want to direct to Ian, which is when can these technologies start to be used? I'm also going to fold in a couple of questions we've already received because they're directly related to this. We've received questions asking, is there a way to know which issuers support delegated authentication with FIDO? What's issuer readiness for a FIDO and 3DS combined flow? So I think you're going to touch on some of these points anyway, Ian, but I just wanted to let you know that we've already had a couple of questions related to this. So if you could take that on, and then of course
Sure.
The others can weigh in as well.
Thank you. I think the starting point is sort of FIDO readiness. And so, as I mentioned, FIDO, Christina can say more perhaps, but FIDO is now ubiquitous. And so, including browser support and device support. So starting from there, SPC, as I said, builds on it and provides this user experience where the user sort of confirms they want to make a payment, and then they do the FIDO authentication, sign the data of the transaction, and then the issuers can validate that using 3D Secure. So that built-in browser user experience is shipping today on Chrome and Edge and can be used on Mac OS and Windows. And we learned a couple of weeks ago that it's coming soon to Android. Part of the goal of all three of our organizations is interoperability, and in the case of W3C, that means support across browsers. So that is ongoing work that we are doing to engage with different browser vendors to get support for the SPC extensions to FIDO. From a specification perspective, our version 1 is stable, and as Bastien mentioned, referenced by 3D Secure 2.3, and we are planning to advance it through the W3C process soon. That's perhaps less interesting than the fact that it's deployed in software today. I do not have data on issuer support yet. Maybe Bastien is in a better position to take that on.
Yeah, two things that I'd like to mention. First of all, I mentioned version 2.3.1 of 3DS earlier, but it's important. I'd like to add that there is a way to support SPC with the previous version of 2.1.2, because as the audience can imagine, knowing that the spec 2.3.1 has been released in August, there's not yet a lot of deployment. I should say there's no deployment as far as I know yet. The 3DS product providers are currently implementing it. So, but there is the EMV3, the previous version of EMV3DS supports SPC through the challenge flow, challenge method. So there's no need to wait for 2.3.1 in order to support SPC. That's an important point, and definitely EMV 2.3.1 or 2.2, EMV 2.1 or 2.2 are heavily deployed now in the field and heavily used. So related to 2.3.1, we are at EMVCo working hard to have the testing environment, testing availability ready for the first half of 2022. So we can expect to see a migration to 2.3.1 at the pace of the product provider, but starting the first half or the second half of 2022.
All right, thank you, Bastien. So we have some questions that have come in. I think we're probably going to get more. I see there's a lot of people on this call, and I would suspect that we probably haven't answered all of your questions, so please give it some thought. You've got a great panel of experts here, willing and ready to answer your questions. So, you know, I do have a few more questions I can ask, but we certainly want you to take this opportunity to ask your questions. So with that, I'm going to move over to, we already addressed the first couple of questions that we had about issuer readiness. So let's move on to this question from Anjali. If once the 2.3.1 EMVCo specifications are implemented, could I get rid of the existing FIDO implementation with the FIDO server? I think possibly more than one panelist might want to weigh in on that question, but Bastian?
I'm happy to start, and I'm sure Christina will correct if I said something wrong. But no, definitely the FIDO side of the authentication still requires, let's say, validation of the FIDO data at some point. So I'm not sure what you meant by the existing FIDO implementation with the FIDO server, but definitely this technology requires that the FIDO authentication is validated, and somehow on the 3DS side, we are transmitting the data that will be used for the authentication. But then the authentication itself of the FIDO data, FIDO signature will require the usual processes. Christina?
Yeah, that's correct. I think it's important to remember that we're not trying to combine the two technologies. FIDO is still a technology in its own right. It's an authentication technology. 3D Secure takes the data from that authentication and uses it to make decisions as part of the transaction. So I think the answer is no, you can't get rid of your FIDO implementation, but there may be changes you want to make to ensure that it is aligned with what we're trying to achieve here.
Thanks, Christina.
Can I add a little bit to that?
Please.
So one of the special bits of SPC, and where it diverges slightly from vanilla FIDO, is that in the case of FIDO, the relying party in, let's say, the issuing bank is the only party that can initiate authentication using its credential. But in payment scenarios, it's commonly the case that the payment service provider is in the merchant domain. The merchant and the payment service provider would like to retain control over the user experience. And so with that in mind, and also the scale that you get by being able to reuse credentials as a user across websites, we wanted to decouple the authentication ceremony itself from the validation of the results of the authentication, called the assertion. And so with SPC, the user sees this prompt from the browser: do you wish to pay this amount to this merchant? And then you do FIDO authentication. The data about the transaction is signed by the authenticator, and that user experience is a browser-based user experience, but it's fully within the merchant context. You are not redirected to any site. And we hope that one way that we will reduce friction is by having a recognized user experience that works across the web. And then the question was originally, do I still need my FIDO implementation on the server? And so the 3DS rails are then used to transmit the authentication results back to the issuing bank or the ACS to do the validation. And so my longer answer to the question is yes, you will still need to be running a FIDO server to do the validation, but you won't be running the authentication ceremony. That will be done typically in the merchant context.
Thank you, Ian. Very thorough. Next question from Florian. Banks in Europe tend to hesitate to rely on third-party specifications and standards for secure customer authentications, since they want to stay in control of the cardholder authentication as much as possible. So how would the panelists reply to these concerns in the context of secure payment confirmation? ready to go first. All right.
Yeah, I'm happy to start on this one, and definitely others, please jump in. So in terms of 3DS, definitely we support many type of authentication. So SPC is not mandated, mandated. It's not the only option for the 3DS flow, and there are many options or many other ways to authenticate using the 3DS flow. So on our side, it's really about, I mean, the issuer can choose if he's happy to use this type of authentication or anything else. And I'm based in Europe, so I know that my bank loves to usually love me to connect to my bank application for the authentication. So these remains options that they can choose if they want to. But on the other hand, it potentially or add some friction as the consumer might have to do 2 authentication or several authentications. But again, it's a choice of service and based on the value that the banks or the issuer sees in using SPC or not, or asking any other type of authentication.
Can I? Go ahead, Christina.
Please.
Yeah, I'd say a similar scenario with FIDO is we don't require FIDO. It's an option that banks can choose to implement if they so wish. One thing I will say from FIDO's perspective, we have, and I think I mentioned this at the very beginning of the call, is we have seen that there is a challenge to get FIDO implemented in Europe, particularly in the payment space and particularly rated to the European payment regulations. We do actually have a FIDO Europe working group, which is explicitly chartered to focus on those payment regulations and work with the European regulators to understand how FIDO can comply. And so we've done a lot of work in that area, and we've put out a couple of white papers on the topic. We're actually just updating one right now to explain how FIDO does align with the European payment regulations. And so we do care about this aspect of it. And while we don't require people to implement FIDO, we'd love to see more implementations coming out of Europe. And the information that we put out in the white papers and the conversations that we're having with the regulators in Europe really do underscore the sort of desire to be compliant and make sure that we continue to focus on aligning with what banks in Europe need.
So I would make the following case to banks. First, if you do FIDO, you'll have a more secure system than what you're doing today. So that's a bit of a bold statement, but I think that is probably correct if you're relying on one-time passcodes. And then if banks are concerned about controlling the authentication, I want to return to my point about the decoupling of the ceremony from the validation. And so I would be interested in hearing more about what controlling means. Do they want to make sure that they're validating the possession of a device, in which case with both FIDO and SPC, they retain that control, but they cede a little bit of the control of the ceremony to the merchant, which is what merchants prefer. So W3C has been tracking the FIDO discussions about the use of FIDO in Europe. I think that, and W3C has also had its own conversations with the Berlin Group and STET and a few other organizations, just to make sure we understand the requirements related to dynamic linking and so forth. So we're staying on top of it. I'd like to think that what we're talking about here is superior to what's happening today, certainly for web-based payments, but these are ongoing conversations.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Ian. Excuse me. So we've got an operational question here. There's a request to know whether or not this presentation is going to be available after the fact. Yes, this recorded webinar will be available. It'll be up on EMVCo's website for public access next week, possibly with links to it from the sites of the other organizations. And I do want to also respond to a couple of questions that we've got coming in. There's interest in what the payment systems are going to do, what rules are going to be, what mandates they're going to be. And I'll certainly make this comment categorically from EMVCo's perspective. EMVCo is a technical specifications body. We do not get involved in mandates and policies and rules of individual payment systems. That's a very, very strong rule that we follow ourselves internally. I'm assuming Christina and I, and you probably have a similar approach. So we understand, for those of you who are on this webinar, we understand your desire to know that. But you know, if you've got questions about what payment systems might or might not be doing, you really need to direct them to the payment systems. So the next question I'd like to cover here is, could you please elaborate a little more on the advantages for acquirers to use 3DS for SPC? Anyone want to jump in on that one? Bastian, you're answering us on mute again.
Oh. I've got too many mutes button. Sorry guys. So yeah, again, I'm not completely clear on the question. Definitely for the merchant and the consumer, the value is to facilitate the authentication and to increase the number of frictionless authentication. So with the consumer doing nothing. So definitely streamline the authentication using existing technologies. For the acquirer, as a result of this streamlined authentication, the consumer will finalize their payment, and this will limit abandonment. So, but from the acquirer perspective, I mean, I'm not sure what the value is, except that it protects their customer, which are the merchants. So increasing the security by using as well FIDO at the top with authentication. I mean, strong authentication is certainly very valuable for all the actors in the payment space. So I see value in using this flow, first because it will limit abandonment, and secondly because I mean it's a great value for the security point of view.
All right, thank you very much. So I will repeat the comment I made at the start. We now have way more questions than we can possibly answer in the remaining time that we have. And I will address that, how we're going to respond to that later on, but let's see how many we can get to in the time we have left. So this one, as a 3DS from Rami, as a 3DS provider, do you need to perform a certification with FIDO? Yeah, this one is easy. So for an EMVCo perspective, there's no requirement to perform the certification with FIDO. So as a 3DS provider, no, there's no requirements. For sure, to have your, let me phrase it differently. To have your 3DS product certified within EMVCo, you don't need to perform the FIDO certification. I think that's a better statement. All right, thank you. Another question here from Carlos: is transaction confirmation the same concept as payment confirmation?
Design, I'm not sure. I've been using the phrase dynamic linking. That's what I've heard used in the PSD2 context. When we talk about SPC, I've been using the phrase the transaction confirmation dialog. So that's the amount and the merchant name and the instrument, and that's the data that's signed using the authenticator. So I apologize if I have not used the terminology consistently, but for me, I'm intending to speak to that PSD2 requirement for cryptographic evidence of user consent.
All right, thanks, Alan. A question from Thomas. Is there any word on when Safari on the Mac OS and iOS might be able to support SPC?
I will jump in on that one. Because the Safari folks already implement both payment request API and web authentication, we have been hoping to get their support for SPC as well. W3C held its big annual meeting 2 weeks ago in Vancouver, and Apple was part of those discussions. And so I don't have any signals yet. We are working on that. So I think the short answer is, please stand by.
All right, thank you. And there's an additional comment here from Thomas about European hesitance, European issuers' hesitance. It's a possibility that European banks will likely eventually switch to FIDO authenticators in their banking apps. And then once they've done that, then they might also move to use them for 3DS. So next question from Janine. If the SPC authentication fails, can a fallback authentication be initiated without a new transaction being created?
So short answer is yes. We had talked about in SPC providing a mechanism for a fallback authentication built into the API, so they would sort of try the FIDO authentication path through the transaction dialog, and if that failed, then the user experience would stay visible and the other authentication mechanism would happen. In the end, we did not include that in the API because payment service providers who had been experimenting with the API preferred to sort of do the additional work and maintain control over the user experience associated with the other fallback experiences. So if SPC fails without ending the transaction, you might receive a message as a user that another authentication mechanism like one-time passcode is being attempted, and so that would just be a second authentication effort. But so as I said, short answer is you do not need a new transaction.
All right, thank you. I've got a question here saying, will SPC also be extended to payments initiated from mobile applications? If yes, when can we see this?
I'll jump in again. We don't know yet. We've had conversations with our Google colleagues who have, I don't want to forecast anything, expressed some tentative interest in that topic. Could Android apps do SPC as well? And we've even had conversations about what that would mean for 3DS SDKs and so forth. So that is a conversation. I don't have a prediction yet, but I think, again, that I mentioned 2 pilots that are happening earlier, and if the pilots continue to go well and there continues to be industry demand for this, I would be encouraged that it might be adopted at the platform layer. But other than conversations happening right now, I don't want to predict.
All right, thanks, Ian. So this question I think I'll direct over to Bastian. How does EMVCo see the use of SPC and the secure remote commerce technology and specifications?
Yeah, that's a good one. So we started already to discuss between all the groups, so including SPC, SRC, sorry, secure remote commerce people on how SPC could be used. So from the authentication perspective, as you probably know, from an EMVCo point of view, we make sure that all the specifications can be used. So SRC can also use 3DS, and in that case, it can then also use SPC. If there might be some optimized flow to be discussed further, but this is definitely something that we are looking at, and in order to include definitely SPC and some kind of optimized flow within SRC. Ian, you may want to add anything.
Nope, all good.
Okay. So there's a question that I'm often asked this question as well when I'm doing EMVCo presentations on EMV 3DS, and so I think I would like to ask it more broadly to all the panelists. The work that we're discussing here EMV 3DS, FIDO authentication, there's secure payment confirmation. How does all of this fit when it comes to consumer privacy principles, particularly those that have been required by GDPR?
I can start from an EMVCo perspective. So definitely the objective of the spec is to facilitate and enable the transmission of data, but and the rules in terms of confidentiality on information that are shared between the systems might be different country per country. So again, the objective from an EMVCo perspective is to make sure that there are ways to transmit the data and that it's, I mean, as defined by the spec, but definitely it's up to those who implement it to make sure that they comply with their local regulations. So as far as 3DS, and not limited to SPC, but more generally from a 3DS perspective, definitely you guys implementing or deploying 3DS needs to ensure that the information you are providing is done with the consent of the consumer and respect the privacy part.
From FIDO's perspective, as I mentioned, we have a European working group that's very focused on all things regulation-wise. We do have FIDO privacy principles, which are out on our website and explain the basic rules for implementing FIDO whilst respecting privacy. The other thing to note is that because when we do the authentication, there's no shared secrets in the cloud, everything stays on the device. That's also consistent with things like biometrics as well. So nothing is given away. It's all kept on your own device in a secure place. So we do have, as I mentioned, we do have the privacy requirements out there. We have looked at GDPR. There is a white paper on our website talking about how we adhere to GDPR.
Thanks, Christine.
One last comment from an SPC perspective. Our colleagues at Stripe, as part of doing their second pilot, had said that to conform with GDPR expectations, they felt that they needed an opt-out functionality in SPC. So the key to SPC giving users scale and reusing their credentials is that they're stored somewhere, and that each time the user authenticates, the assertion is validated using the public key that's been stored. And Stripe said we need to give the user the option to forget that. And so in the current Chrome Origin trial, that's their beta testing program, there's an opt-out feature in SPC. So we are awaiting results to determine if that's the way we go to support that GDPR requirement.
All right, thank you, Ian. So we're heading up to the end of the hour. I've got one wrap-up question, and I'm going to direct this to Christina. And after that, if the organizers could put the deck back up on screen. But Christina, you know, certainly a lot of great work's been coming out of the WPC, the Web Payment Security Interest Group. You know, what do you think's next for that group?
Well, so we're coming up for recharter, which is part of the W3C process. So I'd let Ian speak to that process. But that, from my understanding, is we take a look and see if we want to change any of the work that we're doing or do new things. I don't think there's a plan to do that right now. I think we'll continue to do the good work that we're doing. It's clearly been a very successful group, and there's a lot of active engagement, and it's meeting the needs, I think, of the three organizations. Again, not wanting to speak on behalf of Ian and Bastian. The other thing that we have is we did put out one publication called How Technologies Relate. Back when we first started the group, there was a lot of questions and confusion around how FIDO and 3D Secure and WebAuthn all fit together. So we took some time to sit down and think about how best to articulate how all of this works together. So explain what it is, and then how they work with each other. And so that document's been out there for the last 2 or 3 years. as we've all heard today, a lot's been happening. There's been a lot of progress made in both in the individual technologies, but also collectively with things like SPC. And so we're really looking to update that document and, you know, think about how these things have evolved and make sure that we can clearly explain how it all works together. So I'd encourage everybody on this call, maybe not now, but once we've got to the point when we can publish an updated version, is to pay attention and take a look at that document, because it is valuable in terms of explaining how all this fits together. And I think certainly some of the questions we've heard today, we can maybe think about in the context of how we update that paper as well. Aside of that, I think really just information sharing and making sure we all understand what each of the organizations is doing, so that we can ensure that we are aligned and that we are sort of presenting a consistent approach as we go forward.
All right, thank you, Christina. Could you put the slide 13 back up on screen for me, please? So as I thought, we weren't able to get to all of your questions, which is often the case. Please, if you would like us to get to your question, here's the contact information for how you can submit your question. If you think it was related to EMVCo or W3C or FIDO Alliance, please send us a question and we'll do our best to get you an answer through that mechanism. And we're at the top of the hour. I would like to thank our panelists so much, but I'd also like to thank all of you who dialed in. You know, we appreciated your excellent questions. You know, we would encourage you to stay in touch. We've got multiple means of engagement here with the EMVCo that you could see on the screen, and I'm sure you know, you've got similar models that you can use with FIDO Alliance and W3C. And again, thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to everyone who dialed in.